Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I am going to be talking about The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. This is a book that was recommended to me and the rest of my Patreons in my Discord, and we decided to pick it up as a buddy read for the month of October because it's got horror vibes, it's got spooky vibes, so we thought it would be a good book to pick up. This is a book that is about a young boy who goes by the name of Robert. He's basically sent to a school for punishment after attacking a white boy. After reading the author's note, I found out that this book is actually loosely based and loosely influenced by an actual school that existed in Florida that went by the name of the Dozier School for Boys. I personally think this makes the story even more heartbreaking because this is a tough book to read. Like, it's set in Jim Crow, Florida. It's set during a time where Black people were dehumanized day after day after day, where they were treated as not even second-class citizens, but as third-class citizens. They weren't even really viewed as being human. I think that's why a lot of white people were able to justify in their own twisted heads why they were able to do what they were able to do. But it's tackling some very, very, very serious, very horrific themes. And this is a book that, before I jump into, I will give a trigger warning. I don't typically give trigger warnings, but for this one, it's a hard read. There are literal descriptions of abuse, just awful violence that is committed against children. There is talk of sexual assault. There is just a general tone of just sadness and just the realization that this actually happened, right? Like, I think sometimes we forget that this happened. Not only did it not happen, but it didn't even like end until like relatively recently when we look at the scope of human history, right? So it's horrific. Like, it is just the most depressing read, and yet there's still these little moments and glimmers of hope. And with that in mind, I will jump into my non-spoiler review. So the first thing that I will say about this book is that the prose is simple and effective. And I've talked about this before on my channel before. I think having prose where it just gets the point across and does it in a way that just flows really nice is such a treat. I think too many authors try to be flowery with their words, but I think Tananarive Due does an absolutely brilliant job of making this story flow really well. I read this book a lot quicker than I thought I would. It's a 600-page book and the font is quite small, so it's not a small book, but I read it in like 4 or 5 days because it was so addictive to read. And I think that addictiveness comes from the simple prose. As an extension of this, the pacing of the book is exceptional. The book is split into parts. I think it's 7 or 8 parts that it's split into, and each book kind of revolves around a specific event that's happening. And we also shift between Robert, who is our main character, and his sister, Gloria, who is like a secondary character. The way that she separates each section really makes sense for this type of story. And it really sets this kind of tension for what is to come. This should have felt like I was reading a pretty long book, and yet the time went super quickly and I was able to get through it a lot quicker than I would even some 300, 400 page books. And I think that is a real testament to Due's writing. The tone of this book, as I kind of alluded to earlier, is super, super dark. There is this kind of oppressive feel that we gradually get as the book progresses, as we face what Robert is going through and we're experiencing it live with him. There's also haints in this book. Now, I had never actually heard of the word haint prior to reading this book. And as I was reading the book, I did decide to do a little bit of research around it. It's basically the African-American word for spirits. And so there's a very specific connotation to using that word, especially when we look at it at the broader context of this book. I would like to actually say more about the haints, but I don't want to spoil the book, so I will hold off on doing so. But every single time a haint was in a chapter, like, it just added that extra sense of abhorrent violence that has happened in this world. And it gives us a sense of what Robert is having to now live through. And it feels very hopeless because we're kind of pattern matching what's happened in this school prior to Robert joining, then what's actually Robert's reality. It's horrible and terrifying to read. It's not an easy read either because of that. She just does an incredible job of creating this very dark, tense atmosphere. Now let's move on to characters. So as I mentioned, there's kind of two main characters that we follow, 2 POVs that we follow. We have Robert, who is 12 years old, if I remember correctly. And he essentially has an incident that isn't even his fault with a white boy, and he gets sent to this school called the Reformatory to basically reform his behaviour. And he's only been sentenced to 6 months, which, you know, for a lot of the kids that get sent there, they get multiple years, sometimes even up until the age of, I think it's about 21. Bear in mind, they go in when they're like an early teen, a very, very young adult. So, you know, there's like potentially 5, 6, 7, 8, even maybe even longer than that they're in the Reformatory. Robert gets a pretty light sentence. There's a reason why that I won't give in this review, because again, I don't want to spoil it, but it's very tactical on the side of the government. Robert is a very likable character, and the reason why he's such a likable character is because he's extraordinarily innocent. He looks at the View with an innocence that you would expect of a 12-year-old child. He also is very kind and very compassionate, and when he finds out certain things about the spirits, the Haints in this school, he tries to understand them from a place of compassion rather than judging them for things that may or may not have happened. Even when he is faced with the stark reality of the superintendent of the school, who is a white man, he's super racist, and he's just like, he's straight up evil. Like, he's just an evil guy, and he's like literally murdering children and abusing children and getting away with it. And that's not really a spoiler, you get that from the back of the book. Robert still tries to approach it with some level of like not judging him and trying to just survive, right? Like, he's just trying to survive and is trying to come to terms with some very adult things that are happening to him. And yet he can't quite rationalize it because he doesn't really know how to, because he's so young. Robert is an amazingly written character. Like, I've really, really felt for him. I really wanted him to be protected and saved. And I won't add anything more than that, but just such a well-written character. The second character, or the second POV that we follow, is Gloria. Gloria was maybe marginally more my favourite character, just because there's so much put on this young girl's shoulders. She's about 16 years old, and she is trying to keep her family together. She is trying to find a way to get Robert out of the Reformatory. She's trying her absolute best. The thing about Gloria is that she had a potentially really bright future ahead of her because she's very intelligent. She works in the household of this white woman who, you know, quite likes her. And even though their relationship isn't perfect, she does try to help her in the way that she can. And I think that's really a testament to Gloria more than anything else, because she's such a bright, compassionate young adult. I really liked her chapters as they give us an insight into like the secondary victims of this sort of regime, of this sort of situation, where even though she's not the one in prison, she's going through her own kind of form of punishment that isn't her fault or Robert's fault, and there's nobody or nothing that can really help them. The final character that I'm going to talk about is Hadock. Hadock is the superintendent, and he is one of the most evil characters that I've ever read. We actually do get his POV a little bit throughout the book. It's not like, as you know, we don't get a lot of time with him, but we do actually kind of get the opportunity to be in his head, and he is just the worst. He's the worst. He is just completely irredeemable, and he is pure evil. And we find out things about him towards the end of the book that genuinely made me want to vomit and made me like stop reading the book for a minute. I personally don't understand how someone can be that evil. We get kind of reflections on him and who he was before he went to the Reformatory to become superintendent, and we realise there's a pattern of behaviour here that would indicate that he would ultimately become the person that he becomes. He's awful. Such a well-written character, because you genuinely feel fear for these characters' lives when he comes into the picture. You genuinely feel scared of Hadock. Like, I felt scared of Hadock on behalf of Robert and Gloria. Like, I just felt so tense because you just don't know what he's going to do. You don't know what he's capable of. I mean, you do know what he's capable of, but at the same time, you don't know if he has a limit. And that's terrifying. One of the best villains that I've read, I think, genuinely made me have goosebumps. In terms of themes, naturally with a book set in Jim Crow, Florida, and set during a time where, as I mentioned, Black people were treated as like tertiary citizens, as third-class citizens, there's a lot around oppression and dehumanization of anyone who is different, and the kind of systemic nature of that. How it wasn't just individuals who had these beliefs, but the entire system was built on these beliefs, and it was designed to oppress people who were different. And I say people, and the majority of that applies to Black people, but it also applies to people who were, you know, not white. As an example, one of the characters is Jewish, and he's held in contempt by some of the other white characters. We also have characters who sympathize with the black cause. They're also vilified in a really horrible way that kind of prevents other people from standing up for what is right. While the majority of that is very much experienced to a much larger and harsher degree by black people, it also shows like the secondary impact on other people who are also marginalized. The dehumanization aspect of this really interests me from a psychology perspective, because of, you know, things that I've been seeing today about certain events that are happening in the world that I've talked about previously. But the dehumanization of these characters and of this group of people it just goes to show you that if you don't view someone as human, you can literally do anything to them. You can commit the most heinous crimes and in your mind you will be justified. And that to me is the scariest thing of all. Like, it's so scary to me that people can genuinely view another human being as something other than human because they are different to them. Like, that's terrifying. And that was kind of one of the stark realizations that I kind of came out of when I read this book. I mean, I knew that prior to reading this book, but I think when you see it so unapologetically, you can't help but be faced with that very obvious realization that I think we sometimes forget. There's also exploration around the justice system and how, as I mentioned, these systems are systemically problematic. They are set up in a way that's designed to hurt people who aren't accepted. The justice system is rigged. And then there's also some really interesting exploration around like family dynamics. The children in this book are forced to grow up and forced to do very adult things and have to have very adult conversations that no child should have to have. One thing that I will mention is that Gloria and Robert's mother is dead. You learn that very early on in the book. And their father is not present for the majority of the book. They are almost having to be their own parents. And there's some really interesting, especially with Gloria, investigation around that I really appreciated and I really valued. And I kind of wish we'd had more of it, but I think the way Tananarive Due approached it was perfect in the broader context of this book. So overall, I gave this book a smashing 5 stars. It was amazing. Like, I could not consider giving it anything less than that because it's just so good. The way it's written, the tone, the atmosphere, the characters, the pacing, how it ends. The only thing that I would say if I had to really pinpoint a gripe was the ending was a little bit rushed in my opinion. But even then, like, that's just me clutching at straws. Like, it was amazing. And I'm very excited to have Tananarive Due on my map now. I'm going to keep an eye out for what other books they are going to write. And I'm also going to have a look at their backlist too, because this was phenomenal. Let me know down below in the comments if you have read this book. I'm really curious because I've not heard a ton of people talk about it, but I just think it's such an amazing book and more people need to talk about it. So if you do have any questions as well, feel free to ask me down below. Hope you liked this video, folks. If you liked it, please do give it a thumbs up and I will see you in my next one. Thanks for watching. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.